Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for coming for the next session of the symposium. I would like to invite to the podium the moderator and the panelists, please. The panel's title is the Maritime Security, so another very important topic and very important theater out there. And the panel will concentrate on a couple of hotspots around the world, namely the Horn of Africa, the Gulf of Guinea, and also the Asia-Pacific region. So I would like to give the floor to Ambassador Simonyi, representing the SAIS from the Johns Hopkins University, who will introduce the panelists and lead the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Let me start by reading just one paragraph of a document that was adopted by the Council and the European Parliament, because I think it's a good introduction to the discussion we will have. What we are going to do is I'm going to ask each of the panelists to explain their views on the subject in 5 to 8 minutes, not longer. And then we'll have a debate, and I really hope the audience will be actively participating in the debate. So let me just read this this one paragraph, because I think this is a terrific introduction to why maritime security is so important to the Europeans, to the European Union. Europe's maritime interests are fundamentally linked to the well-being, prosperity, security of its citizens and communities. Some 90% of the EU's external trade and 40% of its internal trade is transported by sea. The EU is the third largest importer and the fifth global producer of fisheries and aquaculture. More than 400 million passengers pass through EU ports each year. Depends on open, safe seas and oceans for free trade, transport, tourism, ecological diversity, and for economic development. Failing to protect against a wide array of maritime threats and risks may result in the seas and oceans become arenas for international conflicts, terrorism, or organized crime. It's a very good document. You can pull it off the internet, and it's really, really good reading. But I just wanted to frame the problems or the questions at hand, and now I will turn to the panelists. We have three terrific panelists here. First of all, I'd like to ask Lieutenant General Wolfgang Wosolsobe to give his introductory remarks. The Lieutenant General assumed the responsibilities of Director General of the EU Military Staff in Brussels on May 28, 2013. He was promoted Brigadier General in 2001. During the following 6 years, he contributed to shaping the international posture of the Austrian Armed Forces. During the defense reform process conducted during this period, he largely contributed to the adaptation of Austria's defense policy to new realities, particularly to European security and defense policy. I would want to say that as a Hungarian, I've always been trying to persuade the Austrians to become members of NATO, because I think once that's done, then we can start talking about the resurgence of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy. But that's the only debate we might have: who is going to be the Kaiser this time? Is it an Austrian or a Hungarian? But we can make that part of the conversation later. Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome Lieutenant General Wolfgang Wosolsobe. Please.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. You found the best introduction to highlight the motivations for the European Union to shape her own maritime strategy. It's exactly the introduction I would have chosen. And what we are building on that, we are in the process of shaping a maritime strategy, building on two main principles. It's first the insight that a safe and secure maritime domain can uniquely be based on rules-based good governance at sea. That's the first principle. And the second is that this has to happen in a holistic, interagency, cross-sectoral, and cooperative manner. And cooperation is one of the keywords which goes like a red thread throughout our project of a maritime strategy. What is the strategy to address? Of course, our assessment of the relevant risks and threats, the description of our maritime interests hinted at here, and the ways of coordination we can envisage in this context. There is, of course, a military role. We, the military inside the European Union, mechanisms and structures are part of the comprehensive approach. We deliver to the comprehensive approach. There was much mention this morning about CSDP and this afternoon. So we are part of this, and I will now briefly describe where. Allow me to start with the Horn of Africa. Horn of Africa is a very good example for the European Union's comprehensiveness. We have there 3 missions and operations in place. The Admiral's executive operation in counter-piracy, and he will describe that more in detail afterwards. A real success story, as much I can say. Second, a training mission for Somalia, for Somali armed forces. And third, a capability civilian mission, capability building mission. But these 3 items are embedded in a much larger context of development cooperation, development policies, political dialogue, and many more. We also established a regional strategy for the area with action plans, particularly also on anti-piracy action, but also on development. We established also a special representative for the European Union for the area. More in detail, EUTM, Somalia is part of the insight that fighting piracy needs at least a twin-track approach at sea and on land. And we delivered the land side partly with training for the Somali armed forces. This is, by the way, an example of very good cooperation with the United States. We do it in 2 main directions, 2 pillars. It is military training proper, and it is a strengthening advisory role to the security structures of the Somali government. And we have a civilian mission here in place, which has mainly as a task to strengthen the seagoing capacities of 4 countries of the region, which are Djibouti, Kenya, Tanzania, and the Seychelles, which are key elements in the wider picture of fighting piracy in the Indian Ocean area. It has also to build a rule of law and to strengthen rule of law in Somalia. And it has to strengthen the legal framework for combating piracy in the entire region. So these are our building blocks here, and that illustrates well the comprehensiveness. We have now a new challenge, or at least a more recent one. That's the Gulf of Guinea. Let me briefly turn to that in saying that we have very recently established a strategy, a regional strategy related to the Gulf of Guinea, which brings together our experience for the Horn of Africa where applicable. And I have to say immediately, the type and kind of piracy we have to face in the Gulf of Guinea is very different from that we have in the Horn of Africa. But still, there are lessons which can be transferred. We intend here to follow a multi-pronged approach from the EU side. Given the fact that it is a region composed of a number of very different countries, we tried to strengthen the regional institutions, mechanisms and interactions which address not only piracy but also organized crime in a wider sense. We strengthen in bilateral relations the institutions in these states addressing the risks I described. And of course, all this is embedded in a development effort. Let me very briefly turn to Asia, where you are well aware of the risks, and I would add one additional aspect here, that is the fact that in the Asian Pacific area, we do not have an overarching structure or organization which could be able to deal with problems related to maritime security. So we have, for the time being, no specific strategy for that area, but we use mainly three tools. This is political dialogue, this is cooperation in crisis management, and it is development assistance. I'm going to come back briefly to the political dialogue. That means, for instance, and I give just examples, participation in the Shangri-La process or in the ASEAN Regional Forum, ASEAN Regional Forum, where we have, as the EU, the co-chair together with Myanmar for this year. To wrap up, I would say the EU effort in terms of maritime security is mainly characterized by its comprehensiveness, by its interagency, cross-sectoral character. It is characterized as well by taking on board of our strategy the entire toolbox of the common security and defense policy, both military and civilian. And speaking for my own house, we deliver to this as the military in the example Atalanta, but also and increasingly through advice, through accompanying measures in the broader context of these comprehensive contexts. Thank you very much.
Thank you, General. In the course of the debate, I will want to ask one of you to explain, because there might be people in the audience who don't exactly know why has the Gulf of Guinea become the top priority suddenly, since because of the media hype, because of Hollywood, because of this and that, there is a perception that the Horn of Africa is still the top priority. I have the impression that it's moving away in terms of the threats and challenges in the region, but you might want to come back to this. I want to introduce Deputy Assistant Secretary Caryn Hollis. The Deputy Assistant Secretary is covering counter-narcotics and global threats. She leads the Department of Defense's global counter-narcotics and threat finance policies and operations, among other global issues, overseeing a budget of over $1 billion. That's scary.
It is scary.
It is scary, yeah. Caryn reports to the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations and Low-Intensity Conflict, the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. And I'd like to highlight that she is not a SAIS graduate, but she does hold a Master's of Art from Georgetown University. And I will not hold that against you because it's a sister institution. So, Caryn, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me today. Just a little background. My office at the Department of Defense is responsible for counter-narcotics activities, has been since the late 1980s. However, we have, as we see as the threats from transnational organized crime have morphed, so have my responsibilities in this part of my global threats portfolio. We are responsible for maritime piracy and looking at the threats posed by maritime piracy to international stability. DoD is committed to maritime security throughout the globe. We are looking at, I will share my perspectives on the three regions we're talking about today. In the Horn of Africa, the EU, the United States, and the international community have made great strides since 2008. Through the concerted efforts of the International Contact Group on piracy off the coast of Somalia, the hijacking of commercial vessels off the Horn of Africa has dropped to its lowest level since 2006. We continue to observe the successes of the industry's use of privately contracted armed security personnel in deterring and countering pirate attacks. And that is one of the key issues, Mr. Ambassador, to what the differences between what's going on off the Horn of Africa and what's going on in the Gulf of Guinea. Naval counter-piracy efforts at sea continue to disrupt pirate attack groups and respond to attacks off the Horn of Africa. Combined maritime forces, NATO, and the EU have made enormous contributions through their rotating chair, I love this one, of the Shared Awareness and Deconfliction meetings, commonly referred to as the SHADE group. Of note, I was pleased to learn that the mandate for EUNAVFOR at Atalanta has been extended through 2016, and we, the United States, are very pleased with that development. Despite these positive gains, it is not a time to reduce our collective commitment to the region. Somali pirates continue to probe for vulnerable vessels, and I would like to thank the European Union for its leadership of the International Contact Group on Piracy off the coast of Somalia this year, and the organization of the 16th plenary, which will be held next week in New York. I was pleased to see the Pirate Trails report by the World Bank, UNODC, and Interpol late last year, and believe we need to collectively devote more focus to tracking and disrupting the financial networks that support pirate activity. The Regional Fusion and Law Enforcement Center for Safety and Security at Sea continues to support operational investigators and military partners to reduce the threat from Somali-based piracy. Together, the international community needs to continue to support and collaborate on initiatives that address the judicial and development components of the piracy problem. The EU, UN, and other international efforts to support the federal government of Somalia, such as the EU helping to develop the Somali military forces, are making a very positive impact. There is no better example of this commitment than the lives and work of Clement Gloriesin of France and Simon Davis of the United Kingdom, both working on behalf of the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, and both who were cruelly killed in an attack by an unidentified gunman in Puntland, Somalia on April 7th of this year. The two men were very involved in the work of the contact group on piracy off the coast of Somalia, and we're on a mission in Somalia to offer technical advice and build local capacities to counter illicit money flows. We honor their memory and their sacrifice, and will remain grateful for their contributions. Turning off the coast of West Africa to the Gulf of Guinea, we've seen that recognize that piracy and armed robbery at sea and other violence against maritime navigation differs markedly between East and West Africa. Somali pirates continue to attack ships in international waters with the desired goal of holding ships and crew hostages for ransom over long periods of time until a ransom is paid. In contrast, maritime criminals based in Nigeria conduct hijackings for cargo theft and kidnap crew members for ransom, but do so over relatively short periods of time. We found that what they're doing is hijacking ships, turning off their AISs and taking full tankers of oil and offloading them and moving them to other loads. It's a very different and complex matter. As well, the use of armed security guards in the territorial waters off places like Nigeria is not allowed by their government's regulations. So it has made a more challenging way for us to confront this as an international community. While the number of hijackings in West Africa is trending downward, the number of kidnappings is trending upward. Last year, there were at least 32 kidnappings in the Gulf of Guinea, and so far this year, there have been 12. Seafarers increasingly face a higher degree of uncertainty when operating in the Gulf of Guinea. Of shared interest is the protection of U.S. and European citizens working in this region. I was pleased to see such a robust turnout of countries participating in Obangame Express exercises in the Gulf of Guinea last month, including participation by European and African nations. We should continue to coordinate capacity-building efforts and support the governments in West Africa so they can effectively patrol their territorial waters. In Asia-Pacific, finally, the maritime domain has always been a conduit of commerce and opportunity for the Asia-Pacific Rim nations. 1/3 of global commercial trade transits the line of communications in Southeast Asia every year. 15 million barrels of oil pass through the South China Seas, and its fisheries provide the largest source of protein in the diets of many regional countries. Yet the maritime domain risks and challenges as well as opportunities. So let me keep going. I think that we know that in the Straits of Malacca, we have enormous opportunities and enormous amounts of piracy. We do continue to work collaboratively with our partners throughout the globe on the issues of maritime piracy and maritime security. This is increasingly, as we begin the pivot to Asia that President Obama has directed us to do, we're looking for increasing opportunities for collaboration with our partners in these areas. So thank you.
Terrific. Thank you very much. And then our third speaker is Rear Admiral Bob Tarrant, who is the operational commander of EUNAVFOR Atalanta. I just want to say that before the admiral was promoted in 2013, was the commander of Combined Task Force 150, responsible for a multinational maritime security operation extending from the Red Sea to the Gulf of Oman. And then on promotion to Rear Admiral in 2013, he assumed the role of Operation Commander, the European Union Naval Forces, Somalia, and Commander, United Kingdom Maritime Forces, which I don't want to mention the time you had spent in offices advising advising commanders. I think this is really what qualifies you in a super way to lead the EUNAVFOR. So, Admiral, the floor is yours.
Ambassador, thanks very much. I'm bringing good news tinged with sadness, and the sadness is, as we sit here, there are still 50 hostages held in appalling conditions by pirates, being moved around Somalia, which itself is a tricky issue at the best of times, and many of them being held for long periods of time, separated from their families. So that is my sadness. My happiness is that we have run a mission now that over 5 years has created the tools that have come to fruition so that we have reduced piracy off the Horn of Africa by about 90 to 95%. How did that happen? Well, I think first you need to know what we're here for. And we're here because the European Union made a choice in 2008 to protect World Food Programme shipping on humanitarian grounds and also deal and protect vulnerable shipping for Amazon. And this really is the key to our business. And we still work very closely with the World Food Programme to this day. In terms of the other tasks, my task is to deter and disrupt pirate activity and to stop it happening. And here, and it's probably a question for later, I'd leave you, the trouble with deterrence, when you achieve a state of deterrence, is nothing happens. And therefore, if you're not seeing attacks, you can be lulled into the position of thinking that all is well, we can all go home because there haven't been many attacks. And that isn't the case. So the message I leave to you is that we are still disrupting pirate action groups, as has been said. They are very active, and if we were not there, there would be a resurgence without any question, and this piracy would cause a problem, not just a financial problem, but a very much a human problem to seafarers on whom the European Union relies. And why do I say that? Because people would go, well, the percentage level of ships taken was very low, but the costs were relatively high. I go for the lower order, which is about 6 billion, as opposed to some of the higher levels in terms of where the costs lie. But I would also say that, in dealing with piracy, this has happened particularly for 4 main reasons. Firstly, cooperation between military forces. There are 3 forces operating here. There's the NATO Force 508, there's the Combined Maritime Forces based in Bahrain, and there's the European Union Naval Force. And it's a big area, very big area. And I was discussing with a colleague only before that I could liken it to having sort of 5 patrol cars inside the Beltway here. And rushing about, and there's still a bit of crime going on in the city. You might know where it is, roughly speaking, but you've got to use small amounts of resources very carefully. So unless we coordinate across the forces on a very regular basis, it won't happen. The second one came out of a force of necessity, and it is about the fact that industry found that their the crews were losing confidence in their ability to operate safely. So it wasn't so much how many ships were being taken, it was the fact that people didn't want to go to sea that caused the problem. And industry and those forces I've just mentioned have a very close relationship now. And best management practice was created, which means that people did things like staying away from the coast of Somalia, going fast, or faster than they would otherwise have done. They took force protection issues, and some of them indeed have taken private armed security as well, and I'll come back to that in a minute. And since those combination of both sides of the coin have happened, we've been able to suppress piracy quite a lot. So most people always tell me, well, private armed security's there, they sort it out. Actually, when we graphically take down piracy, we see that the most effective thing that has happened was better coordination between the military forces. It's at those points where we created that better coordination that we managed to reduce piracy. That's not to say it, but I'm going to use a little metaphor if I may. In the UK, where I come from, we have discotheques and nightclubs, really. And I want you to view private armed security as the bouncers. They're probably not called bouncers in the United States, but Caryn, you're aware of that one. The bouncers outside of the discotheque. And so, therefore, they keep them away, but then they can just go to the next nightclub. Whereas I see us very much more as the police force who then pick them up and take them away. And when we do, what we're seeking is legal finish. It's utterly crucial because it's a crime. And if you don't deter it as a crime, you won't get anywhere. And so the focus in my force is that we will always try to convert catching suspected pirates into catching and getting enough evidence to hand them over for prosecution. And we've had a lot of help in the Seychelles, Kenya, Tanzania over the period, and also now in Mauritius, to be able to exact a proper justice for the crime that they've committed, and that has a deterrent effect. The other point about the European Union in this is that we have very robust, much more robust rules of engagement than people have recognised. More so than NATO do in this area and more so than the Combined Maritime Forces. through the disruption of pirate logistic dumps and that process, we are allowed to take kinetic action onto the shore of Somalia so that we remove the impunity of where pirates used to prepare for these pirate action groups. It's been employed only once, but the effect has been extraordinary in that the effect has pushed pirates to have to do their preparation an inconvenient sort of 10 kilometers or so away from the beach and come out. That has been a huge reduction in their ability to operate. So in sum, so we can sort of deal with questions. It's a successful mission. It's a mission that requires a great deal of coordination, and it's a mission that requires to continue for another 2 years if we're going to effect it. But my challenge, and I'm happy to discuss it, is I deal with the symptoms of piracy, not the causes, and that's really where we need to focus. Thanks.
Terrific. I just wonder, your metaphor on discotheques, does this apply for rock concerts as well?
Let's discuss it afterwards, Andras.
Okay. I thought that was funny. I'm sorry. Okay. I have two questions, and then we'll go to the audience, General and Admiral. I will need to ask you to go political, and I want to ask you because you did say that. At the end of the day, what you're doing is we need to look at the causes, and causes is basically a strategic political issue. But I'd like to ask, in your view, how will the experience that you have in your work influence the political thinking in Brussels in terms of Europe moving towards a more robust military identity, and I just wonder if you have you have any comment on that. I don't want to press you too hard because I know it's a sensitive issue, but I do think that the successes, the level of cooperation, the quality of work you are doing must have an impact on the political discourse. So this is one question, and Caryn, I have a question to you. You did mention the importance of cooperation between the Europeans and the United States. Could you elaborate on that just a little bit, okay? General?
Okay. I think that the use and the success Admiral just described of heavy capabilities in Operation Atalanta is proof for their usefulness in the European context, and is most likely an additional motivation for member states to maintain this type of capabilities. I can witness that political preparedness to do so by, at this time, very sound force flow in force generation. We have a positive force generation in all the areas we have to cover. So I think there is in member states, of course, in the member states delivering that kind of capabilities, the conclusion there is real use for that, and most likely we will tend to maintain that kind of capability.
If I may just add to that, there's a construct here which is not the same in either national chains of command or NATO chains of command that happens in the European Union, and I'm not sure it happens anywhere else. I'm responsible directly to the Policy and Security Committee, and I present myself to them with my plan. And therefore, essentially what I'm saying is that the political and diplomatic arm of the European Union listens to the operational problems and suggestions of the op commander. And that simply means that they are not changed by what other people say. So there's a very, two ways. There's a very raw discussion, which is very welcoming, I think, and gives you license to work right up to the boundary that you've got because you've discussed it with the people. Equally, you are directly accountable to them for the performance of your mission, which is it's unusual. I mean, you present yourself in front of the 28 member states and you justify what you have done or what you have not done, which I don't see in a number of other areas that we operate. The point of this is that it allows you to have a discussion and develop a trust with the people who are telling you what to do from a political point of view that is quite unusual for a commander. And I think that lesson, which doesn't happen elsewhere, allows you that confidence in the way you can command your mission.
Very good. Caryn?
I think that one of the things that I've seen and noticed with the cooperation among both the EU, NATO, and the other forces that are particularly in the Indian Ocean and off the coast of Somalia is unprecedented. There are, I think, 35 nation states that have been there. The missions of Task Force 150, Task Force 151 up at Atalanta, the NATO mission. It's an unusual combination where people are working together. They are communicating together. They're doing exceptional operations that are and trading off and moving through the area, which is an enormous area that has been successful. It's not only been successful in stemming piracy, there's a great deal of interest right now in doing counter-narcotics interdiction, where they're pulling heroin off from the Makran coast that's coming out of both Pakistan and Iran through going down toward Tanzania and Kenya. The Australians, the Canadians, the UK, but the U.S. Navy have done tons of heroin have been pulled off the streets, and this is impacting the health and safety, public safety, in not only Africa but in Europe, the United States, Canada, and elsewhere. So this collaboration, I think, is very important. Theresa May, from the Home Secretary from the UK, was out talking to people in Bahrain to try to figure out how we can cooperate better, both the UK and the US. So we're doing a lot of innovative thinking and working together because, let's face it, resources are going down. And my fear, and Bob and I have talked about this, is fear that people will say, oh, piracy's over, it's time for us to go home. And I don't think it's time for us to go home, because I think the threats out in that area are great.
Very good. Thank you very much. Okay, I'd like to open it up to the audience. Okay, questions? Sir.
Thank you. Dieter Detke, Georgetown University. Piracy has a sea component and has a land component. General Wosolsobe talked about it. On Somalia, in Somalia, there's a land component to it. And Admiral Tarrant talked about this too. And I wanted to mention another thing, and that is who goes after the criminal organizations that are behind, these foot soldiers in Somalia. And they're sitting probably in London, maybe, Canada, or some other places. Is there some cooperation about this? Because I think that's important. The financing is essential. Where do these guys get their cell phones, their SUVs, and the money, the ammunition, and all that from? And these organizations need to be attacked too. Thank you.
Thank you, Dieter. Would like to answer that?
Shall I take it first? Yeah. Yes is the answer. The relationships we have are with Interpol, with whom we now have a liaison officer embedded in Lyon. They are also with a lot of the countries that have come together made up in some of the regional centres. For example, there's a very effective one now operating in the Seychelles that brings this type of information together. Here's the truth about operating on the land, though. The pirates come from very remote places, and so they're very difficult to get at. They are focused very much on piracy rather than anything else. There's very little industry left because piracy has taken over everything. There are 7 or now 8, because one is, sorry, there were 8, now one is on remand in Belgium, who hopefully will come up for prosecution. And we have to work closely in areas that we didn't before. The trouble is, it's very difficult to get into those particular positions to do the development work that will change the position of the young people who are involved in this. It's still work to do, but things are improving, I think, with both that particular bit of flow of information and the ability to prosecute is very important.
Thank you.
Just would like to add one sentence. This is the importance of the rule of law in the countries, which is complementary to that, which cannot solve the problem. In addition, our contacts with the United Nations also help to complete this network.
Caryn, would you have a comment on that?
I think that one of the things we're trying to do is to ascertain where the sources of finance are, where the banks are that they're using, because we know that there are interlocutors that are doing negotiations and ransoms and that are distributing the ransom money. So we're trying to identify those key facilitators so that they can be identified for prosecution and a judicial solution.
Lester, could I just come back?
Yes, please.
I mean, even though the piracy has come down, view the networks as criminal networks, organised crime networks, not as piracy networks. So they have shifted into other particular positions, like illegal fishing licensing, where the pirates themselves now form the private armed security teams on those sort of things. So that's the type of business they do. They're into weapon smuggling, normal smuggling, charcoal smuggling, ivory smuggling, people, horrifically, a lot of people movements between the northern coast of Somalia and Yemen. So there's a huge diversity. The only difference is the financial gain from piracy vastly outweighs anything that they can get as a return. The problem we have is they're also turning to just legitimate businesses. Hotels are quite popular. Well, no reason why that shouldn't be, because, of course, that helps money laundering. Those type of areas are also, we're seeing that. But it's a very difficult place to get into to get that type of evidence.
Very good. Yes, please, sir, in the back.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Miguel. I'm with the Africa Center for Strategic Studies, and I'm delighted to be here talking about maritime safety and security and speaking mainly about Africa. My main interest is in West Africa and Gulf of Guinea, and since we are talking about the European Union, there's one thing that I come across on a regular basis in West Africa and Gulf of Guinea, which is both the different legal systems and the lack of capability. We all know that. But there's one thing that is a growing trend of trying interagency and international cooperation that actually is not working all that well. There are some successes, there are some shortcomings. And one of the things that I'd like the whole panel, to comment, if possible, was the European experience with the commonly called Drugs Observatory, the EMSA, European Maritime Safety Agency, and the MAOC-N, Maritime Analysis and Operational Center, Narcotics. 3 quite different institutions with different member states. Actually, the United States and Cape Verde and so on are observers in the MAOC-N, if I remember correctly. But they all, despite the fact of being different institutions with different member states, work cooperatively very, very, very well on the operational and tactical level, so as to choose, when identifying a threat, when to take action, being sure of the capabilities they can pull, and being sure that the legal system they pick to act will indict. So if you could comment on that, if the feasibility of promoting international and interagency cooperation in West Africa and Gulf of Guinea with similar experiences. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Since we will not have time for any more questions, what I'd like you to do is to weave into your answer the question whether Europe will be joining the United States to try and figure out what we do with the girls kidnapped in Nigeria. I think this is going to become a big issue. I think this is going to be driven by our publics. I think more attention will be paid to it than we think, and so therefore I do think that sooner or later we'll bump into this question. And I just wonder if you have any thoughts on that in terms of policy and in terms of operations. All right, so Caryn, why don't you go first, and then I'll ask the General and then the Admiral.
It's very interesting. As we were coming over here tonight, this afternoon, I heard that there were additional girls taken last night. So, and I also heard that Secretary Carey has committed to provide both legal and perhaps military support to searching for the girls. And I wish everyone all the luck in the world, because this is a horrific incident. I think the cooperation between the EU and the United States in Africa can only expand. It is there, as we all see, there are more and more transnational organized crime actions that are taking place across West Africa, the Gulf of Guinea, extending into Central African Republic, into Tanzania and Kenya. So this is an ever-expanding problem. I work very closely with my colleagues from the U.S. Africa Command to look at ways we can collaborate, but it's not a solely thing that the United States can do in isolation. We have to work with our partners, and I think we've done a pretty good job in the African context to try to be collaborative and understand one another and what the needs of the different forces. I like to say that I try to structure my programs and my activities to complement those of others, both internationally and interagency, so that we can have multiplier effects. There are great needs out there, and as I say, resources are going down for everyone, so we've got to be more collaborative in the future, and I think that we will be doing that in the future soon.
Thank you. General.
I would immediately join in highlighting the importance of a shared situational awareness in these areas. That's one aspect which is broad, which should encompass a number of countries and actors. Your question leads me back to the comprehensive approach. The three European actors you mentioned need to be brought together also to enhance situational awareness in this specific case. What we also need, and the kind of experience we have so far in the area, is the lack of awareness in the area. And we have to address that urgently, and that's one major effort here. More strategically, we were talking about the Gulf of Guinea. The tragic events in the north of Nigeria is linked to the Gulf of Guinea through the country, but it is a phenomenon of the push down of Islamic-influenced action from the Sahel. So we come there to another area of the European strategic outlook, which is on the Sahel. Again, a shared situational awareness.
Thank you. Admiral?
My view on this is that, like piracy, every so often an issue comes around which transcends politics. And this, at a tactical level, is such an issue where everybody needs to pull that support. What I could say is that situational awareness is deeply important from the lessons I've learned in the Western Indian Ocean. And the other part is, through a transcending issue, is the need to share information with your partners, because without information sharing, There is not an ability to have a common assessment, and without a common assessment, all approaches are probably different and usually wrong. So the one thing I would say that's led to the underpinning of our success is an issue that transcends politics, and one in which we can share openly the information to make our tactics effective.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank the panelists, Caryn, General, Admiral, for your comments. I'd like to thank you for being with us. I'd like to make a final comment. We've now spent a whole hour debating, and the name Vladimir was not mentioned. So I'd like to thank you all for your attention. I thought that was funny too. Okay. Thank you very much for coming.